Nobody in Pinewood had ever seen a wild animal mourn a human being, yet for 4 straight days the massive brown bear refused to leave Elena Morrison's side, even in death. The animal had appeared suddenly on Monday morning. Frank Wheeler, the owner of Pinewood Funeral Home, arrived to prepare for a quiet week with only 2 services scheduled. Instead, he found the town sheriff and 3 deputies standing helplessly outside the building. "There is a bear inside," Sheriff Collins told him, his face pale with disbelief. "A big one. It walked straight through the back door I forgot to lock last night. It found the Morrison woman and has not moved since." The bear had somehow located Elena Morrison's body in the preparation room and now sat beside her open coffin. It did not growl. It did not threaten. It simply watched over her with dark, knowing eyes that unnerved everyone who dared look into them. Word spread quickly through Pinewood, a logging town of just under 4,000 people nestled against the vast northern wilderness. By noon, half the town had gathered outside the funeral home, keeping a safe distance as wildlife officials assessed the situation. "We cannot tranquilize it in that enclosed space," the state conservation officer announced. "The drug might take minutes to work, and in that time, a panicked bear could destroy everything and everyone in its path." So they waited. Someone suggested using food to lure it out. Others proposed loud noises. Nothing worked. The bear remained unmoved, as if performing a sacred duty that only it understood. By Wednesday, Elena Morrison's family demanded answers. Her funeral was scheduled for Friday morning, and the situation was becoming unbearable. The local news channels arrived, then the national ones. Pinewood had never received so much attention in its entire history. "It is almost like they knew each other," people whispered, "like the bear is saying goodbye." That was when someone suggested calling Dr. James Thorne. As the town's most respected physician, he had been Elena's doctor for over 15 years. If anyone knew something about Elena that might explain this bizarre situation, it would be him. Dr. Thorne arrived at the funeral home on Thursday morning. Tall and lean with silver hair and intelligent eyes, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone used to solving difficult problems. The crowd parted as he approached, their faces showing equal parts hope and desperation. Sheriff Collins met him at the door. "Thank you for coming, Doctor. This situation is getting out of hand. The funeral director is threatening to call in hunters if we cannot resolve this by tonight." Dr. Thorne frowned. "That would be unwise. Has anyone been injured?" Number. "That is the strangest part. The bear is completely non-aggressive. It just will not leave her." Inside, the funeral home smelled of flowers, formaldehyde, and the musky scent of wild animal. Frank Wheeler led Dr. Thorne to the viewing room doorway. Inside, the scene was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. Elena Morrison lay in an open casket of polished oak. At 62, she looked peaceful, her silver hair arranged neatly, her hands folded over her chest. Beside her, the enormous bear sat on its haunches, its head occasionally dipping to sniff at her still form. The animal was magnificent, at least 8 feet tall when standing and covered in thick brown fur with silver tips that caught the light. "It has been like this for 4 days, Wheeler whispered. "It barely sleeps, does not eat, just watches over her. We cannot delay the funeral any longer. The family is distraught." Dr. Thorne studied the scene, his medical mind racing through possibilities. In 15 years as Elena's physician, she had always been something of a mystery. A wildlife photographer who lived alone in a cabin at the forest edge. She rarely came to town except for necessary supplies and her yearly checkups. She spoke little about her personal life, though Dr. Thorne had always sensed there was more to her story than she revealed. Now, looking at the bear's evident grief, he was certain of it. "I need to see her medical files," Dr. Thorne said finally, "and I would like to speak with her family. There is something very unusual happening here, and I suspect the answer lies in Elena's past." As he turned to leave, the bear's head suddenly lifted. Their eyes met across the room. In that moment, Dr. Thorne felt something pass between them. A recognition, a silent plea. It sent a chill down his spine. This was no ordinary animal behavior, and he was increasingly certain that Elena Morrison had not been an ordinary woman. The medical clinic where Dr. Thorne worked sat on the edge of Pinewood, a modest building of red brick and large windows that had served the community for over 40 years. Tonight, only his office light burned as he pulled Elena Morrison's medical file from the cabinet. Outside, darkness had fallen, but Dr. Thorne barely noticed. His mind kept returning to the image of the bear beside Elena. The animal had looked at him with such intelligence, such purpose. In 30 years of medical practice, Dr. Thorne had learned to trust his instincts. Something about Elena Morrison's death did not add up. He opened the thick folder on his desk. Elena had been his patient since moving to Pinewood 15 years ago. She had always been healthy for her age, with only minor complaints over the years, until 6 months ago. Dr. Thorne flipped to her most recent visit notes. Elena had come in complaining of unusual symptoms, increased sensitivity to smells, changes in her vision, periods of extreme hunger followed by days where she barely ate. At the time, he had ordered a complete blood panel, suspecting perhaps early onset diabetes or a hormonal imbalance. What he found instead had confused him then. Now reviewing the results again, they seemed even more significant. Highly unusual protein markers, he had written, elevated growth hormones, blood cell morphology showing unexpected variations. He had referred her to a specialist in the city, but Elena had canceled the appointment. When he called to reschedule, she told him she was feeling better. He had not questioned her further. Dr. Thorne pulled out the actual lab results, studying the numbers more carefully. Her white blood cell count had been elevated, but not in a pattern suggesting infection. The lab technician had added a note. Sample contains unidentified cellular structures, possible contamination. Recommend retest. But they never did retest. Elena had stopped returning his calls. He continued through her file, looking for anything unusual in her medical history. 3 years ago, she had come in with a deep laceration on her arm that required stitches. She claimed she had fallen while hiking, but the wound had a peculiar pattern that had not seemed consistent with her story. 7 years before that, she had experienced a period of what she described as lost time, moments where she could not remember what she had been doing for hours at a stretch. He had recommended a neurological workup, but again, she had declined. Dr. Thorne rubbed his tired eyes. The pattern was clear now. Elena Morrison had been experiencing strange symptoms for years, but always refused further investigation. What had she been hiding? He reached for his phone and dialed the number for the county medical examiner. "Carl, it is James Thorne. I need to ask about Elena Morrison. What was the cause of death?" The voice on the other end sounded tired. "Heart failure. Nothing suspicious. Why are you asking at this hour?" "Was an autopsy performed?" "Number, no reason to. She was found in her bed. No signs of trauma." "The family did not request one?" Dr. Thorne frowned. "What about toxicology?" "James, it was a straightforward case. Woman in her 60s with no suspicious circumstances. We did the standard panel. Nothing unusual showed up. I need you to check her blood work again. Look for unusual protein structures, anything that seems abnormal." A long pause followed. "This is about that bear, is it not? Everyone in town is talking about it." "Just humor me, Carl. I have been her doctor for 15 years. Some things are not adding up." After securing a promise to re-examine the samples, Dr. Thorne hung up and sat back in his chair. Outside, an owl hooted in the darkness. His gaze fell on a framed photograph on his wall. It showed a mountain landscape at sunrise, the light catching on morning mist rising from the forest. Elena had given it to him years ago, one of her photographs. He had always admired her work, the way she captured animals in their natural habitat, revealing something intimate and knowing in their expressions, as if she understood them in a way others could not. Dr. Thorne suddenly sat forward. He had visited Elena's cabin once years ago when she had been too ill with flu to come to town. Her walls had been covered with her photographs, including several of bears. One bear in particular appeared in many shots, a large brown bear with distinctive silver-tipped fur. He stood up abruptly. He needed to visit her cabin. Something told him the answers he sought would be found there. But first, there was one more person he needed to speak with. Margaret Wilson had been the nurse on duty when Elena was brought in after her death. If anyone had noticed anything unusual about the body, it would be Margaret. Dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold as Dr. Thorne drove his old Jeep along the narrow dirt road leading to Elena Morrison's cabin. The conversation with Nurse Margaret had only deepened his concerns. Her body was unusually warm, Margaret had told him, even after being found 8 hours dead. And there was something else. Her fingernails seemed thicker, almost like, well, like claws. The nurse had dismissed it as a trick of the light, an imagination working overtime. But combined with the strange blood results and the bear's behavior, Dr. Thorne sensed a pattern forming. Elena's cabin appeared through the trees, a sturdy structure of logs and stone perched on the edge of a small clearing. Morning mist still clung to the ground, giving the scene an otherworldly quality. No police tape marked the property. With no suspicion of foul play, the authorities had simply locked up and left. Dr. Thorne found the spare key where Elena had always kept it, beneath a stone carving of a bear near the front steps. The irony did not escape him. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine, wood smoke, and something else. Something musky and wild. The main room was neat but lived in. Photographs covered the walls, most featuring wildlife in stunning detail. The bear from the funeral home appeared in at least a dozen shots. In some, it seemed to be looking directly at the camera, its gaze knowing and intelligent. He moved through the cabin methodically. The kitchen revealed nothing unusual. Her bedroom was similarly ordinary, though he noted a large dog bed in the corner. Elena had never mentioned owning a dog. It was the small study off the main room that finally yielded something significant. The desk contained medical journals, many focused on genetics and evolutionary biology. Not typical reading for a wildlife photographer. A notebook beside them contained handwritten notes, complex chemical formulas that were beyond Dr. Thorne's understanding. But the real discovery came when he noticed the slight gap in the wooden paneling behind the desk. Pressing against it revealed a hidden door, swinging open to reveal a small, secret room. Inside was a laboratory, not sophisticated by professional standards, but impressive for a private setup. A microscope, a small centrifuge, refrigerated containers labeled with dates and cryptic codes, shelves lined with medications and compounds, many with labels from research facilities. Against one wall stood a filing cabinet. Dr. Thorne pulled open the top drawer and found what he was looking for. Journals. Dozens of them, dating back over 10 years. He took out the most recent volume and began to read. Day 897 of transformation. The changes are accelerating now. I can feel my body adapting in ways I never anticipated when this began. My senses continue to sharpen. Yesterday, I could smell a herd of deer nearly 2 miles away. My vision at night is nearly perfect now. The physical changes are harder to conceal. I have taken to wearing gloves in public to hide the thickening of my nails. Dr. Thorne sat heavily in the desk chair, his heart pounding. He flipped back several volumes, trying to understand how this had begun. In a journal dated 12 years earlier, he found his answer. Something extraordinary happened today. While photographing the aftermath of the forest fire, I found a bear cub, badly burned and orphaned. I could not leave it to die. While treating its wounds with the medical supplies I had, I accidentally mixed my blood with its. The cut on my hand came into direct contact with its open wound. I thought nothing of it at the time. Several entries later. 3 weeks since the incident with the bear cub. I have been experiencing strange symptoms, heightened senses, unusual hunger, and dreams. Dreams where I see through other eyes. The bear cub, now recovering at the wildlife sanctuary, somehow feels connected to me. I can sense what it senses. At first I thought I was losing my mind, but now I believe something profound has occurred. Some kind of genetic transfer. Dr. Thorne continued reading, the incredible story unfolding before him. Elena had documented everything. Her growing connection to the bear she had saved, the gradual changes in her body, her decision to remove the cub from the sanctuary and raise it herself, in secret, deep in the forest. But it was her most recent entries that truly shocked him. I believe the transformation is nearing its final stage. My body is shutting down normal functions, preparing for something new. Dr. Thorne noticed some anomalies in my blood work, but I cannot risk further medical attention. What is happening to me is beyond conventional science. I am becoming something else, something between human and bear, and soon I will need to complete the process. What feels like death to the human world will be rebirth for me. The last entry, dated just 2 days before she was found dead. Tomorrow I begin the hibernation that will complete my transformation. My pulse will slow to near undetectable levels. My body temperature will drop. By all conventional medical standards, I will appear dead, but I will not be. The bear understands. He will watch over me until I awaken in my new form. I only hope the town buries me quickly, before anyone realizes the truth. Dr. Thorne closed the journal, his hands trembling. Elena Morrison was not dead. She was transforming, and the bear knew it. The drive back to town passed in a blur of revelation and disbelief. Dr. Thorne gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing to process everything he had discovered. The journals in the passenger seat seemed to pulse with their impossible truth. Back in his office, he spread the evidence across his desk. The journals, blood test results, photographs he had taken of Elena's laboratory. The story they told was beyond anything modern science could explain. Yet the medical evidence supported her incredible claims. Dr. Thorne carefully read through the journal where Elena had first documented her discovery. 3 months after saving the bear cub and experiencing the blood transfer, she had begun studying her own DNA. The mutation appears to have originated at the exact point where my blood mingled with the cub's, she wrote. Something in bear blood, perhaps an ancient viral component, has integrated with my genome. It is rewriting my DNA, cell by cell, not quickly but steadily. The process accelerates when I am near him. Our connection strengthens it somehow. Elena had documented the changes meticulously. First came the sensory enhancements. Smell so acute she could identify individual people from half a mile away. Hearing that picked up ultrasonic frequencies. Vision that clarified perfectly in near darkness. Then came the physiological changes. Increased muscle density, thickening of the skin and nails. A gradual shift in her metabolism that allowed her to go days without food, then consume enormous amounts at once. Most remarkable was the psychological connection she developed with the bear she had saved. As the cub grew into the massive adult now keeping vigil at her coffin, their minds had formed a bond that defied explanation. I see through his eyes sometimes, one entry read, usually when I am sleeping, but occasionally while awake. He sees through mine as well. We share consciousness. Two beings, two bodies, increasingly one mind. It should frighten me, but it feels like the most natural thing in the world. Dr. Thorne found the research papers Elena had been studying, articles about evolutionary biology, ancient human mutations, theories about human and animal DNA compatibility. She had been searching for precedents, explanations for what was happening to her. Then he found the crucial piece, a research paper from a university in Switzerland, documenting a rare genetic mutation found in less than 1% of the human population. The paper called it the Arcturus gene, named after the bear constellation. According to the researchers, people with this gene showed unusual affinity for bears and bear imagery throughout history. Cave paintings dating back 30,000 years showed figures that were part human, part bear, created by communities who carried this gene. Ancient shamans who claimed to communicate with bear spirits likely had the mutation. I have the Arcturus gene, Elena wrote after finding the research. The bear blood activated something dormant in my DNA, something that has been in my genetic makeup all along. I am not becoming something unnatural. I am becoming what I was always meant to be. Dr. Thorne sat back, overwhelmed by the implications. Elena Morrison had discovered a genetic pathway between human and bear. She had triggered a transformation that modern science would consider impossible. And now she lay in a coffin at the funeral home, not dead, but in a state of hibernation that mimicked death. Her pulse would be too faint to detect without specialized equipment, her body temperature too low to register as living. By all conventional medical standards, she would appear deceased, but the bear knew. It sensed her true condition. Its vigil was not grief, but protection. The animal was guarding her during her most vulnerable state, waiting for her to complete the transformation and awaken. Dr. Thorne checked his watch. It was nearly noon. The funeral was scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10. In less than 24 hours, they would bury Elena Morrison alive. He gathered the journals and rushed toward the door. He had to stop the funeral. But he knew no one would believe the truth without proof. He needed evidence that even the most skeptical mind could not dismiss. He needed to prove that Elena Morrison was still alive. The funeral home was quiet when Dr. Thorne returned, carrying his medical bag and Elena's journals. Most of the curious onlookers had gone home as evening approached. Only Sheriff Collins remained, standing guard outside the viewing room where the bear continued its silent vigil. "I need to examine her," Dr. Thorne said, his voice firm with newfound certainty. Sheriff Collins looked skeptical. "The medical examiner already declared her dead, James. What do you expect to find? Something everyone else missed?" The sheriff hesitated, then nodded. "The bear has been calmer today, almost as if it is tired, but be careful." Dr. Thorne entered the viewing room slowly. The bear lifted its massive head, watching him with those intelligent eyes. There was no aggression in its posture, only watchfulness, almost as if it had been waiting for him. "I know what you are protecting," Dr. Thorne said softly to the animal. "I am here to help her." The bear made a low sound in its throat, not quite a growl. Then, to the doctor's amazement, it shifted slightly away from the coffin, creating space for him to approach. Elena Morrison looked peaceful in death. Her skin was pale but not waxy, as would be expected 4 days after death. No signs of decomposition were visible. Dr. Thorne placed his medical bag on a nearby table and removed several instruments. First, he checked for a pulse using a specialized ultra-sensitive stethoscope he had borrowed from the hospital. For nearly a minute, he heard nothing. Then, just as he was about to give up, he detected it, the faintest flutter, a heartbeat so slow and weak it would be undetectable by standard methods. Once every 2 minutes, perhaps even less frequent. Next, he used a thermal scanner, also borrowed from the hospital. Elena's body temperature registered at 86 degrees, far below normal human temperature, but not the room temperature expected of a corpse. "My God," he whispered, "she was right." He took a small blood sample from her arm, noting the unusual thickness of her skin as the needle pierced it. Under his portable microscope, the blood cells showed astonishing anomalies. The red blood cells were larger than normal, with unusual protein structures attached to their surfaces. The white blood cells showed even more dramatic changes, their structures somewhere between human and what he recognized from veterinary textbooks as ursine. Elena Morrison was alive, and she was changing. Dr. Thorne carefully documented everything with his phone camera: the heartbeat, registered on the stethoscope's digital readout, the temperature scan, the blood sample images. Then he gathered his evidence and stepped back. The bear moved forward immediately, resuming its protective position beside the coffin. "Thank you," Dr. Thorne said, feeling only slightly foolish for speaking to the animal. "I will make sure they do not bury her." Outside, Sheriff Collins waited expectantly. "Well, did you find anything?" "We need to cancel the funeral, Doctor," Thorne said firmly. "Elena Morrison is not dead." The sheriff stared at him. "Have you lost your mind? She has been in that coffin for 4 days. She is in a hibernation state. Her heart beats approximately once every 2 minutes. Her body temperature is 86 degrees. These are not the vital signs of a human, but they are vital signs nonetheless." Sheriff Collins looked unconvinced. "James, I have known you for 20 years. You are a good doctor and a rational man, but what you are suggesting is impossible." "I thought so too, Doctor," Thorne replied, "until I found these." He handed the sheriff several pages from Elena's journals, carefully selected to explain what was happening without revealing the full extraordinary truth. Elena discovered a rare medical condition affecting her metabolism. She knew this might happen. She left these notes explaining everything. The sheriff read slowly, his expression shifting from skepticism to uncertainty. "This is hard to believe." "I have medical evidence, Doctor," Thorne insisted, showing the images on his phone. "We can bring in specialists from the University Research Hospital. They can verify my findings. But we must act quickly. If we bury her tomorrow, we will be burying her alive." The bear let out a sudden loud moan from the viewing room, as if understanding and emphasizing his words. Sheriff Collins flinched at the sound. "That animal has been acting strange since it arrived, almost like it knows something we do not." "It does, Doctor," Thorne said simply. "It knows she is alive." Morning brought chaos to Pinewood. News that Dr. Thorne was trying to stop the funeral spread through town like wildfire. By 9, a crowd had gathered outside the funeral home, including Elena's confused and angry family, reporters from 3 counties, and what seemed like half the town's residents. Inside, Dr. Thorne faced the funeral director and Elena's brother, a stern-faced man who had flown in from Arizona. "This is outrageous," Robert Morrison said, his voice tight with anger. "My sister is dead. The medical examiner confirmed it. Now you want to delay her funeral because of some crackpot theory about hibernation?" "It is not a theory, Doctor," Thorne insisted. "I have evidence. Your sister documented everything. She knew this would happen." "My sister was a nature photographer, not a scientist," Robert snapped. "Whatever journals you found were probably fiction she was working on. Elena always had an active imagination." Dr. Thorne looked to Sheriff Collins for support. The sheriff cleared his throat uncomfortably. "The university hospital team will be here within the hour," the sheriff said. "They can verify Dr. Thorne's findings." "I think we should wait." Robert Morrison threw up his hands in frustration. "And what about that animal? It has been guarding her body like some kind of supernatural guardian. Are you going to tell me that is normal too?" As if on cue, a commotion erupted from the viewing room. The bear, which had been quiet all morning, suddenly let out a loud roar. Everyone froze. "Something is happening," Dr. Thorne said, rushing toward the sound. Inside the viewing room, the bear stood over Elena's coffin, making soft grunting noises unlike anything Dr. Thorne had heard before. It looked up as they entered, and to everyone's shock, stepped back from the coffin, as if inviting them to approach. "My God," Frank Wheeler whispered. "Look at her." Elena Morrison's skin had taken on a flushed appearance. Her chest rose and fell with shallow but visible breaths. As they watched in stunned silence, her eyelids fluttered. "Get my medical bag, Doctor," Thorne ordered, rushing to her side. "And call the ambulance." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Thorne monitored Elena's rapidly strengthening vital signs as her brother stared in disbelief. "This is impossible," Robert whispered. "She was cold. We all saw her." "She is still cold by human standards," Dr. Thorne replied, reading the thermometer. "Only 92 degrees. But her heart rate is increasing. 15 beats per minute now. Rising." The university medical team arrived just as Elena opened her eyes. They were not the eyes, Doctor, Thorne remembered. The irises had expanded, taking up most of the visible eye, and the color had changed from blue to a deep amber gold. She looked around slowly, her gaze landing first on the bear, which made a soft sound of recognition, then on Dr. Thorne. "You found my journals," she said, her voice rough but clear. "Yes," he replied simply. Elena smiled, revealing teeth that seemed slightly sharper than before. "Then you know what I have become." The medical team rushed forward with equipment, questions, and amazement. But it was clear within minutes that they were witnessing something beyond their understanding. Elena's vital signs stabilized at levels impossible for a human. Her body temperature settled at 94 degrees. Her heart rate at 20 beats per minute. Her blood samples confounded their portable analyzers. "We will need to take her to the research hospital," the lead doctor said. "This is unprecedented." Elena sat up in the coffin, moving with surprising grace for someone who had been presumed dead days earlier. The crowd outside had heard the news and chaotic sounds filtered through the windows. "The world is not ready for what I have become," she said. "What exactly have you become?" her brother asked, his anger replaced by wonder. Elena looked at the bear, which had remained calm throughout the commotion. "Something new, something between human and bear, a bridge between two worlds that have been separate for too long." Dr. Thorne understood then what her transformation meant. Not just for Elena, but for science, for medicine, for humanity's understanding of what was possible. "Your condition could revolutionize our understanding of human potential," he said. "The ability to adapt, to evolve within a single lifetime. The medical applications alone are staggering. Suspended animation for surgery, enhanced healing, extended lifespan." Elena nodded. "That is why I documented everything. But the world must be prepared carefully. This knowledge could be misused." As the medical team prepared to transport her, Elena stood for the first time. She moved to the bear and placed her hand on its massive head. The animal leaned into her touch with evident affection. "We are connected," she explained to the astonished onlookers. "Two beings sharing consciousness. It is not something I can fully explain in human terms. You would need to experience it to understand." Outside, the crowd gasped as Elena emerged from the funeral home, walking under her own power, the bear padding faithfully beside her. Camera flashes erupted. People pointed and stared in disbelief. The woman who had been dead was alive, and she was extraordinary. As the ambulance prepared to take her to the hospital, Elena turned to Dr. Thorne. "Thank you for believing the unbelievable," she said. Dr. Thorne smiled. "As a doctor, I was taught to follow the evidence, no matter where it leads, even when it leads to something miraculous." He watched as Elena Morrison, something both more and less than human now, took her first steps into a new life that would challenge everything humanity thought it knew about the boundaries between species, about evolution, about what it truly means to be human. The unbelievable truth had been uncovered, and nothing would ever be the same. If you found this story captivating, do not miss our other incredible true medical mysteries. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Legacy Stories, for daily videos revealing astonishing cases that challenge medical science. Click the notification bell so you never miss an upload and join our growing community of mystery lovers. The truth is often stranger than fiction, and we bring it directly to you.